Perspective, Carl. Let's go to our phone lines. Good morning. What is your question for Carl Gallups?
Good morning, Mike. It's Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, Carl, just 3 questions for you, and then I'd like to just make a quick comment and a thank you to you. One, are we really living in the Romans 1 era of being turned over already? Not a matter of going to be turned over to our sin, but already being turned over. 2, the delusion I think it talks about in the New Testament that's going to come towards the end times. Aren't we already in the delusion? I don't think it's a delusion that's going to happen. Aren't we in the delusion? And 3, I wanted to kind of thank you and reference this issue with, I'm not supporting this candidate, but I think it's such an ironic issue that Ted Cruz is getting issued questions about his birth and where Canada and all this stuff. And I happened to be listening. I caught a YouTube of you and Avi Lipkin the other night. I think it goes back to 2012 or 13. And what a beating your head against the wall you've been doing. I saw you moderate a thing on the birth issue a little bit. And when you were talking to Avi Lipkin about his wife Rachel and her being an Egyptian who was a translator for the Israelis on Arab media and all the things that go on with Arab, and hearing about in 2008 Obama being by the Arabs anyway, the Saudis saying we were going to be a plant and we were going to have a Muslim president. Isn't it just kind of ironic that right now we pick and choose which ones we want to sit and bang around? Nothing's been said back then, but now we got this thing with Cruz going on. So, and the other thing with that, with the Obama thing, maybe you could address it too. And the third point about it was do you think we're going to get hit? I mean, are we going to get hit between here and the election? Is there something going to come up with this guy in there being the kind of guy that he is and who he supports? Do you have a sense on that or not? And just like your comments, and I appreciate all the work you've done, and just kind of banging your head up against the wall. So,
well, Dave, thank you. And Carl, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to digest that because Dave threw a lot at us.
Get it, yeah.
We'll take a quick break and come back in a minute with Carl Gallups. We're blessed to be able to talk with Pastor Carl Gallups, and we're talking about his latest book, Be Thou Prepared. It's a clarion call for the church and Christians to understand the times we are living in. Well, Carl, let's go to Dave's questions if you can respond to them.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And Mike and Dave, hosts, thank you so much for having me today. And Dave, the caller, thank you for your kind words and your questions. You asked 3 questions. The first 2 kind of go together, Dave, as I know that you knew. So let me just repeat them for our audience, and I'll answer those. You asked my opinion on, don't I think that perhaps we're in the Romans 1 time of being turned over to a depraved mind, as one translation puts it. And also you asked if we were in those New Testament times, and the Apostle Paul spoke of it. He warned Timothy specifically about the delusion of the end times. In fact, the church at Thessalonica in chapter 2, and Timothy, in the letters to Timothy, he warned his pastors and churches, even in the first century, about the end times. And the reason he would warn them then is because, elements of these things have always been around. But in Romans 1 and in Timothy and in Second Thessalonians chapter 2, he warns of this turning over to a depraved mind, this demonic influence, this apostasy, the throwing of truth to the ground. And yes, Dave, you're right. I mean, I agree with you, Dave, that in many ways we are at least in the beginning stages of that now, if not fully immersed in it. And I'm telling you, Mike and Dave, the hosts, I have been saying, and I'm thoroughly convinced, that once America, the greatest presence of a Christian nation the globe has ever seen in 2,000 years, once we, as a people, through our Supreme Court last year, declared, we brought in the Sodom and Gomorrah spirit and said, marriage can be whatever you want it to be, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Just the one you love. Once we did that, I think the Romans 1 influence has come upon us, that spirit that says, that men exchange their natural desires, women exchange their natural desires, and had relations with each other, men with men, women with women, and God gave them over to a depraved mind. And then it goes on to say that he didn't only give them over, but he gave over to a depraved mind everyone who promotes it and agrees with it and encourages it. And so here we are. And listen, I'm not a homosexual hater. I'm not. I really, really am not. But the problem is, I see that once a culture embraces and legalizes these kinds of things that the Bible warns us against, and once we begin to give support to them, then the Word of God says we will be given over to a depraved mind. So Dave, the caller, I would say, yeah, we scratch our heads. You know, we say, what are people thinking? What are corporations thinking? What's the president thinking? What is Congress thinking about all of the stupid things they say about borders and security and global warming and the greatest threat to the world and ISIS and bring over the refugees and the immigrants and open our borders? And we scratch our heads and say, what are they thinking? And we teach our children they come from monkeys, and we teach them all manner of sexual perversion. What are they thinking? And my answer is, we've been given over to a depraved mind. So Dave, I think you're right. I think we're there. And then the last question you asked had to do with the irony and the hypocrisy of where we are now in this presidential election cycle. And for 8 years, those of us who have been immersed in trying to determine who is literally in the White House, who is the man that's commander-in-chief. And the reason I say that is because he has locked down every identifying document. He has spent almost $2 million, and not a soul, even the Congressional Research Service, has put it in writing that no one has ever officially vetted the man that's commander-in-chief with his finger on the red button. They've never done it, and his documents are locked down. Heck, we knew all about George W. Bush's National Guard service. We don't know anything about the man that's the commander-in-chief now. Not in an official way, we don't. No one does. There's not a single hospital in this nation that officially claims to be the birthplace of America's first black president and Nobel Peace Prize winner. What's the chances of that? So, you know, for 8 years, a lot of us have been screaming, please find out who this guy is. And by the way, for the audience that's listening, that's thinking, I got another birther on there, let me say a couple of things about that. Hillary Clinton was the first person to bring this issue up. Chris Matthews got mad at her on Hardball, and we've got all of this on the PNN News and Ministry channel in video format, audio format. But Hillary Clinton actually is the one who first broached the subject that she knew for a, quote, fact that Barack Obama was not eligible to serve. She later went on to say she knew for a fact he was born in Kenya, so Hillary was the first birther. Chris Matthews got mad at her for saying that, not that he disagreed that Obama was born in Kenya, but he went apoplectic that Hillary would expose it. So we've got all of that on video, and it's in audio format and in written transcript form. So, I mean, you know, this has been going on forever. Now we come to this election cycle, and we've got Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, both of them ineligible. Neither one of them are natural-born citizens. Are they legal citizens of the U.S.? Yes, they are. Cruz was born in Canada, but to a mother who had American citizenship. Now, I know there's a lot of debate that maybe she had Canadian citizenship as well, and so, you know, that could all be debated. But let's just pretend like she was thoroughly American, legal citizen, then that would make Cruz a legal citizen. The problem is he was born on Canadian soil, and his father at the time of birth was a citizen of Cuba. So that does not make him a natural-born citizen, but it makes him a legal citizen. So he can hold any office in the land except the presidency. Now, Rubio is an anchor baby, plain and simple. He was born in Florida, but both of his parents were citizens of Cuba at the time of his birth. Now, they were both legally in the United States. They both had green cards or visas or whatever they needed to be legally here, but they were not legal citizens of the United States when they had Marco Rubio as a child. So Marco Rubio is a legal citizen, but he's not natural born. Now, again, I'm going to wrap it up by saying this. for those that are listening that are saying, well, yeah, but there's this decision and that decision in 1790 and a law was passed. And listen, this thing's been debated up and down through the years. It's always been debated around the issue of where a person is born. Could they be born on a military base? Could they be born on a holding of the United States, in a territory, not necessarily in one of the states? What about the territories back on the continent, back before Arizona, for example, was a state? It was a territory. So all of those things have been argued through the years, but never has it been questioned that you got to be born by parents who are legal citizens. Now, so I tell people, the latest legal definition of natural born, this is not a law, but it is a legal definition, a constitutionally legal definition that was never challenged by the Supreme Court, never challenged by the media, and never challenged by Congress. And that is a vote of Senate in 2008 in Senate Resolution 511. They were trying to determine the legal eligibility of John McCain to run since he was born on Panamanian soil, Panama Canal Zone. They said in Senate Resolution 511, we find him lawfully eligible to run for president in 2008 because, number one, he was born on an American military base in Panama Canal Zone. We declare that American territory. And number two, both of his parents were legal citizens at the time of his birth. Now, that's not a law, but it is the legal definition of natural born upon which the last two presidential elections have been run. And apparently this next presidential election. So until somebody overturns it, that's why Donald Trump told Ted Cruz, look, you need to get a ruling on this. You're a constitutional lawyer, Ted Cruz. Take it to the courts. Take it to the federal courts. Take it to the Supreme Court. Get somebody to rule, because under Senate Resolution 511, which we've run the last two elections, you're not eligible. So there's the point, Dave the caller. Yes, I have been beating my head against a brick wall. Avi Lipkin did back before the election. He and his wife Rachel, they work for Israeli intelligence. They're in Israel. And Avi has run for the Knesset before. He's very deeply involved in Israeli politics. He was a ranking officer in the IDF, worked for the government in intelligence. He and his wife both. They were picking up transmissions before the 2008 election coming out of Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabians were celebrating that America was soon to have a Muslim president that Saudi Arabia was placing in office. Mm-hmm. And at the time that was being said, Rachel Lipkin went to her husband Avi and says, what are these Arabs talking about? There is no Muslim running for president in America. And they did some research and discovered there was a young man by the name of Barack Obama who claimed to have Muslim heritage, who was indeed in the race. And sure enough, he's the one.
Well, do you think...
So that's what Dave was talking about.
Okay, I've got about 5 questions I'd like to ask because there's so many things you touched on there, but we got to go to a phone call here. Good morning. Welcome to Stand Up for the Truth. Who's this?
Good morning, Mike and David. Carl, good to hear from you. And you kind of just got touched on where I was going to go. And being a relatively deep studier of Islam, and really understanding the agenda for what they have, I was going to ask you, what do you think about all these things I really see as decoys, the climate change, all the government intervention and overbearing regulations and everything? Are they just decoys for Islam's agenda, do you think? And I expect, pagans that I talk to not to understand the time we live in and the agendas out there. But what really concerns me is when the church doesn't get it, and people who claim to be believers. I talk to a lot of people, and I actually see this as like the days of Noah while he was building the ark and preaching, because when the rapture happens, it's like it's going to be too late, and I care about people's souls for eternity. So I do share the gospel, and we have joy in it, but the passion really is for people's souls, and I'm just wondering if you think that the agenda, even if after Obama leaves, the doors are open to Islam's agenda, and what you think about that.
Thank you for the call, Ron.
Yeah, Ron, thank you so much, and Mike and Dave, thank you for letting me address Ron. God bless you, Ron, for listening to the show, and thank you for calling in, and thank you for your kind words. A lot of people share your insight about the possibilities of these decoys for the Islamic agenda. Listen, there's no doubt. I mean, ISIS is clear about this. Islam is clear about this. Radical Islam is crystal clear. They have an agenda for world domination. They have an agenda for the elimination, or at least forcing into servitude, Christians and Jews. They have as an agenda the destruction and annihilation of Israel. Now, they have as an agenda to bring down the powers of the West, particularly the United States. They are patient. They are deceivers by historical heritage. This has been documented. We know our own government has been infiltrated by Muslim Brotherhood. We know that Sharia law, there have been more than a dozen states that have had to battle attempts to enforce Sharia law or to ingrain Sharia law in American culture. So it's going on before us. So anybody that would deny the power and the relevance of the agenda right before our eyes, Ron, I think would be laughable. So I think you're right. I think there is an agenda. Well, we know there's an agenda, and it's a matter of, are we willing to acknowledge it, stand up to it, and do something about it? You ask, why doesn't the church get it? And again, I guess at the risk of sounding like a broken record, Ron and Mike and Dave, I'm just going to have to say this. I think it's because the church's greatest blessing has become its greatest curse. We've been dropped right in the middle of America, the land of freedom, the home of the brave. We're so strong, we're so rich, that churches in America can actually fight over the color of the carpet, and who gets a badge pinned on their chest and who doesn't, and who gets to sing a solo this Sunday and who doesn't. That's what we fight over. And we've got Christians in the Middle East that are getting their heads cut off and watching their little daughters and wives raped before their eyes if they don't submit to Allah. So why doesn't the church get what's going on? Because we're so immersed in wealth and opulence and luxury and safety and security. And I praise God for those blessings. I'm not disparaging those blessings. I don't want them to go away, but sometimes the church has to be shaken before it gets it, Ron. And I agree with you. I often say that it's like we're living in the days of Noah. We're living in the days of Lot. Luke 17, Jesus said it'll be just like the days of Noah, just like the days of Lot. And what was it? Well, in both of those cultures, people were immersed in selfishness and sin, and yet in the midst of them lived God's people. Noah and his family, they lived right in it, through it, right up to the day that God poured out his wrath, and then God raptured Noah out in the ark. Same thing with Lot. They lived right in the midst of it, right up to the day God raptured them out by sending angels and taking them out and then poured out his wrath. But in the midst of it, God preserved Lot and his family. He preserved Noah and his family and used them for witnesses of the coming wrath of God. So I say, Ron, to you, to Mike, to Dave, to the listening audience of Q90 FM, we have been raised up for such a time as this. We are to be the salt. We are to be the light. We are to never grow weary of doing good. God is on his way. I'm not setting dates and times, and maybe a couple of 100 years, but the bottom line is we are the generation God has raised up to prepare the world around us. Wow.
Can't say I disagree with any of that, Carl. And one of the quotes in your book, partial quote, if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. And you kind of brought me around to Romans 1 again with what you just said. Verse 32, although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. Now, approval of sin is what Paul is referring to in the book of Romans chapter 1. What would you say? Now, we just talked about ISIS and Christian persecution being slaughtered in other countries, which is true. We're not getting a lot of it because of the media in America, and they want to keep us focused on the United States of entertainment and how comfortable we are. But what would you say to someone who said, let's talk about terrorism for a minute. The two greatest acts of terrorism on America were the Supreme Court in 1973 and 2015 when they said murder is not murder and marriage is not marriage, family is not family. What would you say in response to that?
I would say amen. What's your next question? No, truly. I mean, in 73, it initiated 60 million deaths of little children in our nation, and those 60 million kids would have all grown up by now, would have married within their generations, and so we literally killed maybe 100 million of our own people. And we're wondering why we're growing older as a nation. We're wondering why we've got to have an influx of immigrants to keep our nations and our technologies and our brain trust going. We're wondering why we have to have open borders to staff our military, because we've killed 100 million of our own people through that act of terrorism we invoked upon ourselves. Same thing with the family. With the destruction of the family goes the destruction of society. When we declared, in effect, we don't know what a family is anymore. We don't know what a marriage is. Heck, I guess it can be just whoever you love. When we declared that and codified it, well, actually, it's not law. There is no federal law that mandates all 50 states to perform gay marriages. Most people don't know this. Some states are waking up to it. But the Supreme Court opinion gave the impression that now America has to do this.
Yes.
And people have acquiesced. Pulpits have acquiesced. And so they're giving approval.
Sad. Carl, we've got about 5 minutes left. Let's turn our attention to the importance of Christian community and fellowship, both now and if there is a natural or economic or terrorist disaster and Christians are scattered or forced to go underground. How important is true fellowship to Christians these days?
Yeah, thank you. The Bible calls it koinonia. It's the Greek word, and it means intimate, interacting, relational fellowship. Not just texting somebody, not friending somebody on Facebook. But it means, hey, Mike, I'm going to say something that might convict you. It has convicted me. Who are your next door neighbors? What are their names? What are their children's names? What are their interests? What are their hobbies? The reason I ask this is because if the balloon goes up and the worst case scenario happens and the grid goes down and the streets are closed and martial law is enacted, guess who you're going to live with? Your next door neighbors. Who are they? What do you hold in common? Are they people of faith? What tools and equipment do they have? What tools and equipment do you have that could be shared? What supplies? What survival supplies? Emergency supplies do they have? What skills do they have? How lucky you would be if your next door neighbor was a doctor. What if your next door neighbor is a convicted child molester? Do you know that? I mean, this is what I tell people. It would be good to get involved. There was a time when communities knew each other and they interacted. There was a time when churches knew each other and interacted and pooled resources and ministry resources and actually did ministry together. We have reinstituted a lot of that in my church down through the years because I was convicted of this years ago. But it's still hard for me to find other churches that want to really, really fellowship with other churches and really pool their resources. It's easy for us to give money to funds and to say, okay, I'm connected to other churches. I gave an offering. The Southern Baptist, we have the cooperative program. It's amazing. It's massive. It's run by people in a central office somewhere. We reach the world through it. But Southern Baptist churches, for example, are notorious sometimes for not cooperating with the church down the street. While we brag about cooperating with churches all over the world. So my book really emphasizes this. We've got to wake up. Churches need to cooperate with churches down the street. Neighbors need to cooperate with neighbors. We need to get a sense of community back again in our lives, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, because when times get tough, that's all you have left, guys.
Yeah, we have God and we have each other. And last point, Carl, the need for churches and Christian ministries to do exactly what you said we need to do with our neighbors, to understand each other, understand our beliefs, understand what role each of us as churches and ministries and individuals is going to play when all of these things break loose.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm not calling on churches to compromise and go out and get intimately involved with people of different beliefs and even perversions of the biblical truth. I'm not saying that at all. There are plenty of churches with like faith around you. And I'm saying get involved. pool your resources, discover what talents and gifts and resources each has within their churches, and begin to get involved in ministry and relationships together. Because when disaster strikes, listen, on a small scale in our community, I live in Hurricane Alley. We had Hurricane Katrina rip through here, Hurricane Ivan, Hurricane Dennis. They devastated these areas, and our church became what would you call it? A staging area. I mean, we started getting other people and agencies and churches to bring food and water and supplies and clothing. We got it in by the semi-truckloads, and we happen to have a lot of property, and so we produced a staging area and had people from all over the community coming to our church to get food and clothing and water, and people's homes were blown apart and destroyed, and their lives were turned upside down. And so we learned the hard way. You better know how to cooperate when the times get tough, or people will die. So this book issues a clarion call to churches. Please get out of your comfort zone. Please do some thinking and planning. Think for the tough days ahead that may possibly come, and let's cooperate together now.
Amen. Carl, how can people connect with you, and how can they get a copy of Be Thou Prepared?
Thanks. The easiest way to connect with me is carlgallups.com. Everything about me is there. My church, my radio programs, tons and tons, thousands of videos that we've produced and materials, all of my books, etc. And the easiest way to get my books electronically, of course, to order them, is Amazon. And I've got a huge authors page there. Just put my name in Amazon, Carl Gallups authors page. All of my books are there, materials, everything about me, how to contact me, everything. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all the social media. So that's how. Will we see a copy of your birth certificate on your website? Yeah. Hey, you know what? If it's ever called into question, I can produce it instantly. Instantly. Unlike some people who will go unspoken of. Carl, thank you, brother. Appreciate you very much. God bless you, and look forward to talking to you in February. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Dave. I do look forward to it. God bless you both. God bless you, Pat.